Hello, my name is Archana Rajendran, a Salesforce.com consultant with over 10 years of work experience in the field of CRMs. In this video, we are going to understand about the concept of validation rules in Salesforce. Before we actually jump into the concept, before we get to know how do we create them, how do we use them, how do we enable them in Salesforce, let's first understand why do we need validation rules. What is the necessity for us to use validation rules? In fact, validation rules are something that we very commonly experience in real time in our day-to-day life. Let me just cite some few examples. I believe most of us would have a Google account, right? If we can quickly recall that process, we can understand about validation rules. So when I sign up for a Google account, say for instance I do not give in any details and I just hit next step. What happens? The system throws a lot of error messages, right? It says like these fields cannot be empty. Okay, so maybe let me just give first, last, and let me just say some characters for this, and then let me just hit next step. And now like these error messages are gone, and here it says like please use only letters, numbers, and periods. So why it does all these? Because the system has got some expectations on the data. And that's the reason basically it is throwing all these error messages. Okay, so let's keep this aside for the time being. Let me quote a different scenario. Say for example, you want to fly to Orlando this summer. Okay, and we are basically booking our flight tickets. So in that process, say I do not give in any details and I hit search. Boom, the system throws an error message. And it says like there are some details that is missing. Again, why? Why is that the system is throwing error messages? Because the system has got some expectations on the data. So now even in the previous instance while creating a Google account or in this instance of booking the flight tickets, we encounter the same thing, right? The system has got some expectations on the data. So when we say this, we got to understand why the system has got these expectations. To ensure good data quality, right? As simple as that. So these expectations are defined as validation rules in Salesforce. So validation rules are rules to validate your data. They are rules to ensure that there is no missing data, there is no conflicting data, and to ensure that the data is as per the standards and formats. And the overall objective is to have a good, better data quality in the system. And from the perspective of a CRM, validation rules are something that is inevitable in Salesforce. In an application, you create numerous records, you got to ensure that the data quality is good, so you use validation rules. And they are very commonly used in Salesforce, and there are numerous instances that we can highlight for validation rules. Say for example, quantity. You are making an order and there is an option for quantity. So quantity cannot be negative, right? It's always a positive number. You field to hold certain values. So when you have a field and when you have a restriction that a field can hold only certain values, then you can use them, then you can enable them using validation rules. Zip code to be entered in certain format. This is again very common. When you enter the zip code, you just cannot have some characters in them. So when you ensure that the zip code has to be in some certain format, when the user has to enter that in a certain format, you can go for validation rules. Similarly, like you can quote n number of examples for validation rules. So now that when we understand what is validation rule, why do we use validation rules, it's time for us to understand how do we create and enable validation rules in Salesforce. Let me log into my developer account. This is my developer edition account in Salesforce. Say for example, I'm creating a contact record. So I go hit new record and I just say that as test last name and I hit save. So basically what we see here, I'm able to successfully create a record with just giving the last name. And for this contact, there is no first name, right? But we want to ensure that any user, when he creates a contact in Salesforce, first name has to be made mandatory. But right now, the system allows you to create a record without a first name. Okay, and now that we want to make it happen using validation rules. So how do we make this happen? Go to the quick menu option, go for view validation rules. There are currently no validation rules defined for contacts object. Hit new and let me say mandatory first name. And in the description, let me again put the same mandatory first name. And now that we got to define the formula behind this validation rule. So the system checks this formula. If the formula is satisfied, if the criteria, if the error condition formula is satisfied, then the system throws the appropriate error message. So here the first name, if it's blank, then I got to throw an error message. So I can use the insert field operation, and here I can go for first name, insert the field, and you have numerous functions that you can use behind this. So for checking if a field is empty or not, we have a function which is blank. So I can use that function is blank, and I can say is blank of first name. So this is my error condition formula. If the error condition formula is satisfied, then the system throws an error. And here there is one good option that is called as check syntax. Using this check syntax, you can check if your syntax is right. So here it says no errors found. So the syntax is perfect. So if this error condition formula is satisfied, then there should be some error message that pops up, right? So that is the error message that you basically give. And this error message is generally the verbiage is given by the business. And for the time being, let's say first name cannot be blank for a contact. So this is my error message. And you can also define the location of the error message, whether it has to be on the top of the page or it has to be near to the field, meaning there are numerous fields for contacts: first name, last name, phone, email, numerous fields. So if you want it close to the field of first name, then you can choose the other option. Otherwise, you can say top of the page. Let me say top of the page, hit save. Perfect. So now that the validation rule is successfully created, and as you can see, it is active. Now let's redo creating a contact. Let me say Smith, or let me not give anything for first name. Let me just say John, and let me try saving the record. Okay, perfect, it works. First name cannot be blank for a contact. So the system doesn't let you save a record unless you give a value for the first name. So let me say John Smith, and let me save a record. Now that I'm able to save the record successfully, right, as you can see. So validation rules are rules to validate your data, to ensure that the data is as per the data quality. Similarly, we can create validation rules for n different scenarios in Salesforce. Say for example, accounts. So when I create an account record, let me say the account name is just the account name, and let me just hit save. I'm able to create an account record successfully, right? Let me edit the record, and let me say the quantity is -200. Let me hit save. Perfect, I'm able to save the record successfully. And as you can see, the quantity is -200, where the data is definitely not logical, right? The quantity cannot be negative. So now that I want to enforce a user, whenever he enters the data, the quantity should always be a positive number. So again, we can go for validation rules, view validation rules. As you can see, there are no validation rules defined. Let me create a new one. Let me say no negative quantity. And the same description, no negative quantity, meaning the quantity cannot be negative. So here I got to define my error condition formula. The error condition formula is the quantity value cannot be negative. So quantity less than 0. So when the quantity is less than 0, error message should be popped up. And here I can say quantity cannot be negative. Please enter a positive value. Once done, hit save. Perfect, the validation rule is all ready. Now that I go create a new account, I say new account, and then I give the same value 200, and I try to save the record. Okay, now that the system is not letting me create a record, it says quantity cannot be negative, please enter a positive value. So now I think you understood the concept of validation rules, right? To ensure good data quality. And you can very much relate this with what actually happens in real time, with what actually happens when you book a flight ticket, with what actually happens when you do online shopping, with what actually happens when you create a Google account. So in CRM business, validation rules very much ensure that the data that is entered by the user is as per the standards. And as we discussed earlier, validation rules are rules to validate your data, to ensure that the user enters a record that meets the standards that you specify. Thanks for watching.